They say the desert is a place of ghosts and second chances, but it rarely grants both to the same man. For Wyatt Ford, a cowboy with a conscience as wide as the Texas sky, a single act of mercy in the blistering heat of the Chihuahuan desert would echo across the years. He spared the life of a dying outlaw, a man the world had every right to forget. But the West has a long memory, and when an innocent woman, Wyatt's own bride, stood on the gallows with a noose for a necklace, the only soul who could save her was that very same ghost from the desert, a man whose debt was about to come due in the most spectacular and violent way imaginable. This is the story of how a single spared breath returned to stop a hanging. The sun was a merciless hammer in the Chihuahuan desert, beating down on the cracked earth and the lone figure of Wyatt Ford. It was a land of harsh truths, where life was measured in the shade of a cactus and the weight of water in a canteen. Wyatt, a man whose face was a road map of sun and wind, understood these truths. He was trailing 3 longhorns that had broken from his small herd, their tracks weaving a drunken path toward the Mexican border. He wasn't a bounty hunter or a lawman, just a rancher, trying to build a life with his own 2 hands on a patch of unforgiving Texas soil. His horse, a sturdy buckskin named Dusty, snorted, shaking its head as if to dislodge the oppressive heat. It was then that Wyatt saw it a smudge against the shimmering horizon that wasn't a cactus or a rock. It was a buzzard, then another circling with that patient, unnerving grace that spelled only one thing: death. Curiosity, a dangerous commodity in these parts, got the better of him. He nudged Dusty forward, his hand resting instinctively on the worn grip of the Colt Peacemaker holstered at his hip. As he drew closer, the scene resolved itself into a grim tableau. A dead horse, its flank bloated and dark with dried blood, lay contorted on the ground. A few feet away, propped against a sun-bleached boulder, was a man. He was dressed in the tattered finery of an outlaw, a black duster now coated in a fine red dust and scuffed leather boots. A dark, ugly stain spread across his gut, a wound that was weeping life into the thirsty sand. His face was pale beneath a scruffy beard, his lips cracked and white. Yet his eyes, when they flickered open, burned with a defiant fire. "Come to pick the bones, have you?" The man rasped, his voice a dry crackle. "The birds got here first." Wyatt swung down from Dusty, his canteen sloshing with the sound of life itself. He kept a cautious distance. "What happened to you?" The outlaw gave a weak, cynical laugh that turned into a grimace of pain. "Met a disagreement with a posse from San Angelo. They were more persuasive than I anticipated." He gestured with a twitch of his fingers toward a discarded saddlebag a few feet away. Its contents were spilled a few tins of beans, a tarnished silver locket, and a canvas sack stamped with the insignia of the Blackwater Ridge Bank. It was empty. The posse had clearly reclaimed their prize. Wyatt knew the name. The papers back in dusty railhead towns were full of him. Silas Kane, they called him. Sidewinder Silas. Wanted for bank robbery, train holdups, and the killing of 2 Pinkerton agents. This man wasn't just an outlaw. He was a walking, or rather dying, piece of notoriety. The bounty on his head could buy Wyatt a prime bull and a new wagon. It could make the next year and the year after that a damn sight easier. Wyatt walked over to the saddlebag, nudging the empty bank sack with the toe of his boot. But it wasn't the sack that held his attention. It was the locket. He picked it up. It was simple and silver, and engraved with a single, delicate rose. He flicked it open. Inside there was no portrait, just a tiny, intricate engraving for my Alara. Forever yours. That ain't yours. Silas coughed a trickle of blood, appearing at the corner of his mouth. Wyatt looked from the locket to the dying man. Then whose is it? The bank manager's. Silas whispered, his eyes clouding over with a memory. Was on his desk. Stupid thing to take. Just saw it. Wyatt snapped the locket shut. It felt heavy in his hand, heavier than silver. It was a story, a promise, a life distilled into a small metal oval. Silas hadn't just stolen money. He'd stolen a piece of a man's heart. He looked at Silas, this feared sidewinder, and saw something else, a man who in the midst of a violent crime was drawn to a symbol of love he likely never had. The moral calculus was simple. Leave him. Ride on, and let the desert and the buzzards claim him. It was what justice demanded. It was what the law would have done. He could even ride to San Angelo and claim the bounty on a dead man. No one would ever know. He looked up at the sun, a blazing eye in a bleached sky. He thought of his own small ranch, the sweat and blood he'd poured into it. He thought of the simple, hard, one decency he was trying to build. What was that decency worth if he left a man, any man, to die like this? Even a man like Sliskane. Damn you, Wyatt, muttered to Silas to the sky, to himself. He unhooked his canteen and knelt by the outlaw. Silas flinched, expecting a bullet, not a kindness. Wyatt uncorked the canteen and lifted the man's head, letting a trickle of precious water run over his cracked lips. Silas drank greedily, his eyes fluttering with a mixture of suspicion and disbelief. Why, Silas rasped when he was done. My pa always said, you don't have to be a good man to do a good thing. Right now, I reckon I'm just testing the theory. Wyatt said, his voice gruff. He examined the wound. It was bad, a gut shot that had festered in the heat. Without a doctor, it was a death sentence, just a slower one. But Wyatt had some experience setting bones and stitching up cattle. He tore a strip from his own spare shirt. It was a poor substitute for a bandage, but it was better than nothing. As he worked, cleaning the wound as best he could with whiskey from his flask, Silas watched him, his earlier defiance melting away into a raw, painful vulnerability. They took the money, Silas said, his voice barely a whisper. All of it. $2,000. Money comes and goes, Wyatt replied, pulling the makeshift bandage tight, earning a sharp hiss of pain from the outlaw. What about the locket? Silas looked away toward the endless expanse of rock and heat. I told you. It was just there. Wyatt didn't press him. He knew a lie of omission when he heard one. He finished his work and stood up. Now came the harder part. He couldn't leave him, but he couldn't take him to the law. Bringing in a wounded sidewinder. Silas would make Wyatt a hero in some quarters, but it felt like a betrayal of the choice he'd just made. Taking him to his own ranch was out of the question. He was building a life, not a haven for wanted men. There's an old mission, Wyatt said, thinking aloud. San Esteban. It's a day's ride south of here. Mostly ruins, but a few old padres still live there. They answer to God, not the Texas Rangers. They'll help a man, any man, without asking questions. Silas stared at him. You'd take me there? I ain't carrying you, Wyatt said flatly. But my horse can. I'll walk. The absurdity of the situation was not lost on Wyatt. Here he was giving up his ride, risking dehydration and exhaustion, all for a killer and a thief. He helped the groaning outlaw to his feet, and with considerable effort, heaved him onto Dusty's saddle. Silas slumped forward, barely conscious. Before he mounted, Wyatt pressed the silver locket into Silas's hand. "When you're healed," Wyatt said, his voice low and serious, "your first act as a man with a second chance should be to see that this gets back to its owner. You find that bank manager in Blackwater Ridge, and you put this in his hand. Understand?" Silas looked at the locket, then at Wyatt. His eyes filled with a dawning, painful comprehension. He gave a single, weak nod. Wyatt took Dusty's reins and began to walk, leading the horse and its notorious burden south. He didn't look back at the dead horse or the empty money sack. He just walked one foot in front of the other, a lone man leading his own conscience through the desert, wondering if he'd just made the biggest mistake of his life or the best decision. The sun beat down the buzzards, eventually gave up and flew away, and the vast, silent desert swallowed them whole. He never asked the outlaw's name, and he never gave his own. They were just two ghosts passing in the heat, bound by a singular, unspoken pact. 5 years. In the West, 5 years could be a lifetime. It could turn a boom town into a ghost town, a greenhorn into a seasoned hand, and a lonely rancher into a husband. For Wyatt Ford, it had been the latter. The memory of the outlaw in the desert had faded, becoming a strange, sun-drenched story he sometimes told himself to test the boundaries of his own past. He had never heard another word about Sidewinder Silas. Rumor had it he'd been gunned down in a cantina in Sonora, or that he'd simply vanished. Wyatt was content to let the ghost lie. His life now had a different center, a different sun. Her name was Imelda Rossi. She was the daughter of an Italian Ford mason who had come west to build courthouses and banks, bringing with him a warmth and passion that felt foreign and wonderful in the dusty Texas landscape. Wyatt had met her in the town of Redemption Gulch, where he'd gone to sell his cattle. Her laughter was like a cool drink of water, and her dark eyes held a fire that put the Texas stars to shame. Their courtship was a simple, honest thing, built on shared glances over the general store counter and long walks along the creek bed at dusk. He was a man of the earth, quiet and steady. She was full of life and stories of a world he'd never seen. They balanced each other. Within a year they were married, and the small Spartan ranch house Wyatt had built with his own hands was transformed. Imelda filled it with the scent of baking bread, the bright colors of handmade quilts, and a joy that Wyatt had never known he was missing. She worked alongside him, her hands as capable of mending a fence as they were of tending her precious herb garden. But their happiness, like a tender green shoot in the desert, was a fragile thing. Their ranch bordered the sprawling cattle empire of Elias Thorne, a man whose ambition was as vast as his land holdings. Thorne was a pillar of Redemption Gulch, a town he largely owned. He was a man of iron will and cold eyes, accustomed to getting whatever he wanted. And he wanted the small, spring-fed creek that ran through Wyatt's property. Thorne had made offers, starting with polite business and escalating to thinly veiled threats. Wyatt, with a quiet stubbornness that infuriated the cattle baron, had refused every time. That creek was the lifeblood of his ranch. Without it, his herd would wither. His dreams would turn to dust. The dispute became public knowledge, a low, simmering feud that the townsfolk watched with nervous anticipation. The trouble came on a Tuesday. Wyatt had ridden out to the far pastures to check on a new calf, a trip that would keep him away overnight. He'd kissed Imelda goodbye at dawn, her face framed by the morning glories she'd planted along the porch. It was the last moment of peace he would know for a very long time. When he returned the next afternoon, a knot of unease tightening in his stomach, he saw 2 wagons and a half-dozen riders in his yard. One of them was Sheriff Brody, a man whose loyalty to Elias Thorne was as plain as the sweat stains on his hat. Sheriff Wyatt called out, swinging down from Dusty. "What's the trouble?" Brody wouldn't meet his eye. He gestured grimly toward the porch. "There's been a situation, Wyatt." Wyatt's blood ran cold. He pushed past the sheriff and stormed into his home. The room was in disarray. A table was overturned, and there, kneeling on the floor, her face ashen and stained with tears, was Imelda. 2 of Thorne's ranch hands were holding her by the arms. Bella Wyatt shouted, moving toward her. "Stay back!" Ford Brody warned, his hand on his gun. "What in God's name is going on?" "Get your hands off my wife." It was then that he saw him. Sprawled near the hearth, his fine suit ruined by a dark, spreading stain on his chest, was Elias Thorne. His cold eyes were wet and sightless, staring up at the ceiling of the house he had coveted. "Elias Thorne was found here an hour ago," Brody said, his voice heavy with false authority. "Stabbed in the chest." Wyatt stared in disbelief from Thorne's body to Imelda's terrified face. "This is insane." "Bella, what happened? I don't know," she sobbed. "He came here this morning. He was angry, shouting about the creek. He tried to force himself on me. Wyatt, I swear it. I fought him off. I ran outside. When I came back in, he was like this." "She's lying, one of Thorne's men." A foreman named Caleb sneered. "We heard the shouting from the ridge, heard her threaten him, said she'd see him dead before he ever got her land. And we found this," Brody said, holding up a long, slender knife with a rag. Wyatt recognized it instantly. It was Imelda's gardening knife, the one she used for her herbs, with a handle she'd lovingly carved from a piece of mesquite. It was covered in blood. Found it in her apron pocket. "No," Imelda cried. He grabbed it from the table. "We struggled. It must have. I don't know." It was a nightmare, a whirlwind of lies and accusations. Wyatt knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone that it was a setup. Thorne, frustrated and arrogant, had likely come to intimidate Imelda. Things had gone wrong, or worse, someone else had been waiting. Caleb, the foreman, had always been Thorne's bulldog. What if he'd followed his boss, seen an opportunity, and framed the woman who was the source of his master's frustration? But Wyatt's certainty was worth nothing against the cold, hard facts. The motive was the public land dispute. The opportunity was Wyatt's absence. The weapon was Imelda's. The witness was Thorne's own foreman. They dragged Imelda out of the house, her pleas for Wyatt lost on the wind. Wyatt lunged forward, blind with rage, but was met with the butt of a rifle that sent him sprawling into the dust. The last thing he saw was the wagon carrying his wife away, kicking up a trail of dust that blotted out the sun. The trial was a farce, a piece of theater orchestrated to arrive at a predetermined conclusion. It took place in the very courthouse Imelda's father had helped build. Judge Morrison, a man who played poker with Thorne every Friday night, presided. The prosecutor laid out the case with a mug precision. Caleb, the foreman, gave his damning, perjured testimony. Another of Thorne's men, a young hand named Billy Parker, claimed he'd seen Imelda cleaning the knife by the water pump, a look of grim satisfaction on her face. Billy looked terrified on the stand, his eyes darting towards Caleb every few seconds. Wyatt hired the only lawyer in town, not on Thorne's payroll, a drunkard named Silas Pickering, who did his best but was hopelessly outmatched. Wyatt testified. Imelda testified their love and her innocence, a palpable force in the room, but it was like shouting into a hurricane. The story was too simple, too sensational. The scorned woman, the powerful man, the bloody knife. The jury comprised of townsfolk who depended on Thorne's enterprises for their livelihoods was out for less than an hour. The verdict was guilty. The sentence was death by hanging. The date was set for 2 weeks hence. Redemption. Gulch had its villain. The newspapers called her the Rose of Redemption, a poetic, cruel moniker that sealed her fate. Wyatt was a broken man. He visited Imelda in the small, grimy jail cell. She was a ghost of herself, but her faith in him never wavered. "Find them, Wyatt," she whispered through the bars, her hand clutching his. "Find who did this. Don't let them kill me for a lie." He promised he would. But as he walked out into the hostile streets of Redemption Gulch, a town that now looked at him with a mixture of pity and contempt, he felt a profound and terrifying hopelessness. He was one man against a system of power and lies. He had no evidence, no allies. The truth was buried, and the grave was being dug for his wife. He looked out toward the horizon, toward the vast, empty expanse of the West, a land that had given him everything and was now taking it all away. He needed a miracle. He needed a ghost. The first week was a blur of frantic, desperate motion. Wyatt beat on every door that wasn't slammed in his face. He tried to talk to the young witness, Billy Parker, but Caleb and 2 other Thorne ranch hands were always there, shadowing the boy, their presence a silent, menacing warning. Wyatt confronted Sheriff Brody, presenting inconsistencies in the timeline, questioning the convenient discovery of the knife, but Brody just blew cigar smoke in his face and threatened him with jail for harassment. Wyatt spent his nights poring over the events, searching for a crack in the conspiracy. Elias Thorne's son, Luther Thorne, had arrived from back east for the funeral. Luther was a man cast in a different mold from his father, softer, quieter, with the haunted eyes of a man who had lived his entire life in a formidable shadow. He seemed genuinely grief-stricken, but Wyatt couldn't shake a feeling of unease. Luther stood to inherit everything. It was the oldest motive in the book. But he had an alibi. He'd been on a train from St. Louis when the murder occurred, a fact verified by the station master himself. Despair began to set in, as thick and cloying as the summer humidity. The gallows was being built in the town square. The rhythmic thud of the carpenter's hammer, a constant, sickening reminder of the dwindling time. Imelda was growing weaker, her hope fraying with each passing day. One evening, sitting in his silent, empty house, the scent of Imelda's herbs still lingering in the air, Wyatt found himself staring at the old wanted poster he'd kept. It was yellowed and creased, a relic from a time he'd all but forgotten. Sidewinder Silas Kane, a man he'd saved, a man who owed him a life. It was a fool's hope, a shot in the absolute dark. Silas was likely dead or 1,000 miles away. And even if he was alive, what could a wanted outlaw do? But it was the only thread he had left to pull. He remembered the name of the mission, San Esteban. It was a place for men without questions. Perhaps they would have heard something, a whisper on the wind, of where a man like Silas Kane might have gone. He packed a bag with what little he had, pinned a note to the door of the jail for Imelda. promising he would return, and rode south. He rode with a desperate fury, pushing Dusty harder than he ever had before. The familiar landscape of the Chihuahuan Desert surrounded him, a stark reminder of his first and only meeting with the outlaw. After 2 days of relentless riding, he found the ruins of the mission. It was a crumbling adobe testament to faith, a skeleton against the blue sky. A small, well-tended garden and a thin curl of smoke from a chimney showed that it was not entirely abandoned. An old, stooped man in a simple brown robe, Padre Antonio, greeted him at the gate. His face was a web of wrinkles, and his eyes held the serene, patient wisdom of the desert itself. Wyatt, parched and exhausted, explained his quest as best he could, omitting the part about the hanging and focusing on his search for a man he had brought here years ago. A man with a gut wound and a stolen silver locket. The padre listened, his expression unchanging. "We have seen many wounded men," he said, his voice soft. "The desert is full of them. We offer them water medicine and God's peace. We do not ask for their names, and we do not remember their faces. It is better that way." Wyatt's heart sank. It was a dead end. But this one, he might have mentioned a locket. A bank manager's locket from Blackwater Ridge. A flicker of recognition sparked in the old man's eyes. Ah, the locket. He nodded slowly. "I remember the man, not his name. He was close to death when you brought him. We tended his wound. He stayed for 2 months. He was quiet, but there was a storm inside him. When he was strong enough to ride, he asked for paper and ink." "What for?" Wyatt asked, leaning forward. He wrote a letter the padre recalled, and he drew a map, a very precise map. He left them along with the locket in the care of a traveling merchant we trusted, a man named Matteo. He instructed Matteo to deliver the package to the bank manager in Blackwater Ridge. The man said he had a debt to repay before he could start a new life. And did he? Did Matteo deliver it? He did, the padre confirmed. Matteo passed back through here a season later. He said the bank manager was a man named Alistair Finch. Mr. Finch was overwhelmed. He said the locket had belonged to his late wife. He thought it lost forever. He was so grateful he told Matteo that if the man who returned it ever needed anything, he would help, no questions asked. This was it. A thread. A thin, fragile thread. But it was real. And the man. The one I brought here. Where did he go? Padre Antonio looked out toward the northern horizon. He said he was leaving the devil in the dust. He took a new name, one he chose for himself. He rode north toward the New Mexico territory. He spoke of a town, a place where silver was making men rich and giving them the chance to reinvent themselves. I believe it was called Argento. Argento. Wyatt had heard of it. A booming silver town, a place of opportunity and violence in equal measure. Thanking the padre, Wyatt refilled his canteen and set off again, a fresh surge of desperate hope propelling him forward. The ride to the New Mexico territory was long and grueling. He rode through canyons and mesas, his mind racing. What would he find in Argento? Would Silas, if that was even his name anymore, even remember him? And what could one man, even a reformed one, do against the entrenched power of the Thorn Empire? Argento was everything the rumors claimed. It was a town clawed into the side of a mountain, teeming with life. The streets were a river of mud, crowded with miners, gamblers, merchants, and saloon girls. The air hummed with the clang of hammers and the distant boom of dynamite. It was a town where a man's past could be shed as easily as a dirty shirt. Wyatt started asking questions, a dangerous pastime, in a town full of men with secrets. He didn't ask about Silas Kane. That name would only bring trouble. He asked about newcomers, men who had arrived a few years back with nothing and made a name for themselves. He described the man he remembered, the dark, intense eyes, the quiet storm within. He got shrugs, suspicious glares and warnings to mind his own business. After a day of fruitless searching, his hope once again began to fade. He was in a saloon called the Silver Dollar, nursing a warm beer when he overheard a conversation at a nearby table. "Mr. Cole is buying up the claim on Widow's Peak," a man in a dusty suit said. "Paid twice what it's worth. The man plays a long game." "He always does," another replied. "Hard to believe he rode into town 5 years ago, with nothing but the clothes on his back. Now he owns half of it. Quiet man. Keeps to himself. But when he speaks, people listen." Wyatt's head snapped up. Cole. The name the padre had said the outlaw chose for himself. He felt a jolt, a surge of adrenaline. "Excuse me, gentlemen," Wyatt said, approaching the table. "This Mr. Cole, what's his first name?" The man in the suit looked him up and down. "It's just Cole. Man of mystery, runs the Argento mining and assay office at the end of the main street." "Why, I think I might owe him a drink," Wyatt said, his voice steady, despite the hammering in his chest. He walked out of the saloon and down the muddy street, his boots sinking into the mire. The Argento mining and assay office was the most impressive building in town, a 2-story structure made of Ford and solid timber. It spoke of wealth and permanence. He pushed open the heavy oak door. The interior was quiet and orderly. A clerk sat behind a counter, weighing a miner's pouch of silver dust. The office in the back was separated by a wall of frosted glass, the silhouette of a man visible through it. "I'm here to see Mr. Cole," Wyatt said to the clerk. "Do you have an appointment?" the clerk asked, not looking up. "No," Wyatt said. "Just tell him a man from the Chihuahuan desert is here. A man who walks." The clerk looked up, annoyed, but something in Wyatt's tone made him pause. He disappeared into the back office. A moment later, the silhouette behind the glass stood up. The door opened. The man who emerged was transformed. He was dressed in a tailored suit. His hair was cut short, and his face was clean-shaven, revealing a strong jawline. He was older, his eyes carrying the weight of his new life, but there was no mistaking him. It was Silas Kane. He looked at Wyatt, and for a long moment there was no recognition. Then his eyes widened slightly. He scanned Wyatt from his worn-out boots to his determined face. The memory clicked into place. The desert, the sun, the canteen, the walk. "You, Silas, now." Cole breathed his voice, a low thrum of disbelief. He dismissed the clerk with a flick of his hand. "Leave us." The clerk scurried out, closing the front door behind him. The 2 men stood alone in the quiet office, the ghosts of the desert swirling between them. "I never thought I'd see you again," Cole said, his voice strained. "My name is Wyatt Ford." Wyatt said, finally giving his name after all these years. "And I didn't come here for a drink. I came to collect a debt. My wife is going to hang for a murder she didn't commit." The silence that fell in the mahogany-scented office was heavier than a tomb, Ford. The name Wyatt Ford meant nothing to the man who called himself Cole, but the face etched with desperation and a familiar haunting honesty was a spectre from a past he had fought for 5 years to bury. Cole stared at Wyatt, and in his carefully composed features, a war was being fought. The placid, influential Mr. Cole of Argento receded, and the sharp, haunted eyes of Sidewinder Silas Kane flickered to the surface. He gestured with a stiff, formal motion for Wyatt to enter his private office, a sanctuary of his new life that had just been breached. He poured 2 glasses of whiskey from a crystal decanter, the amber liquid catching the light. His hands were perfectly steady, a testament to the iron control he had forged over himself. He handed a glass to Wyatt, whose own hand trembled slightly as he took it. "You said you came to collect a debt." Cole said, his voice a low, dangerous thrum. He didn't sit, but stood by the window looking out at the muddy, chaotic street of the town he now commanded. "I've often wondered if this day would come, what form it would take. I never imagined this." He turned from the window, his gaze piercing. "Tell me everything. Omit nothing." Wyatt's story poured out of him a torrent of grief, rage, and suffocating helplessness. He spoke of Imelda painting a portrait of her warmth and spirit with the clumsy, heartfelt words of a man deeply in love. He detailed the simmering feud with Elias Thorne, the cold ambition of the cattle baron, the setup that was as cruel as it was clever. He described the farcical trial, the sneering face of the foreman Caleb, the terrified eyes of the boy Billy Parker, and the gallows being hammered together in the town square, each strike a nail in his own heart. He explained his futile investigation into Luther Thorne, the dead end of the ironclad alibi. Cole listened with an unnerving stillness, his eyes never leaving Wyatt's face. He was not just hearing the words, he was dissecting them, analyzing the structure of the conspiracy with a mind honed in a world of lies and violence. The storm Wyatt had sensed in him years ago in the desert was still there, but now it was a controlled, directed force waiting for a target. When Wyatt finally fell silent, the tale of injustice hanging like poison in the air, Cole drained his whiskey in one swallow. The glass clicked as he set it down on the polished desk. "A town run by one man is a rotten town." Cole said, the words cutting through the silence. "Power, like thorns, doesn't just breed loyalty. It breeds fear, greed, and secrets. It's a swamp. You've been trying to fight the monster on the surface, but the real rot is in the roots." He began to pace his movements, economical and precise. "Sheriff Brody. He has a weakness. Men like him always do. Gambling debts, most likely. A woman. Thorne owned him, so his investigation was designed to fail. He's a pawn." He paused, his mind assembling the pieces. "Caleb the foreman. You described him as a bulldog. He's the weapon, the blunt instrument. Loyal, vicious, but not the architect. He hasn't got the mind for it." He stopped and locked eyes with Wyatt. "Which brings us back to the son, Luther, the grieving heir who inherits everything." But the alibi, Wyatt insisted, frustration lacing his voice. "The station master himself verified it. Luther was on a train from St. Louis. An alibi is only as strong as the people who provide it." Cole countered, a flicker of the old Sidewinder's cynicism in his tone. "Timetables can be fudged. Telegraphs can be delayed. People, especially those under the thumb of a man like Thorne, can be bought for a handful of silver." He walked to a large, detailed map of the territories on his wall. He tapped a finger on Redemption Gulch. No Luther is the key, but his motive is clouded by grief, his hands kept clean by distance. The framing of your wife, it's brilliant in its cruelty. It's a flourish. It doesn't just remove his father. It salts the earth of his father's most stubborn enemy. This wasn't just murder. It was business. Cole's composure was absolute, but Wyatt could see a fire kindling in the depths of his eyes. This was more than just a puzzle to him. It was personal. The weak link, Cole declared, turning from the map, is the boy. Billy Parker. The witness. He's cracking under the weight of the lie. Caleb and his men are guarding him because they know it. We break him, the whole rotten structure collapses. I can't get near him, Wyatt said, the familiar despair creeping back. You tried as Wyatt Ford. The desperate husband, Cole said, his voice hardening. You appealed to decency in a town that has none left. We won't be appealing. We will be applying pressure. You have the heart for this fight, Wyatt. He paused. I have the necessary experience in navigating the darkness. He opened a desk drawer, and Wyatt saw for a fleeting second the butt of a holstered revolver nestled inside. And I have resources. He pulled out a stack of telegraph forms. I have dealings with the Southern Pacific Railroad. I can get copies of every passenger manifest, every employee duty roster, and every station telegraph log for the last month. We will find the smudge on Luther Thorne's perfect alibi. He then looked Wyatt straight in the eye, the formality melting away to reveal the raw truth of the moment. You didn't leave me for the buzzards. You gave me water when you could have put a bullet in me. You gave me your horse and walked through that hell so I could live. Everything I have, this office, my name, my very breath, is because of that choice. Your wife will not hang. I swear it on the life you gave me. 9 days. The countdown had begun. Cole's efficiency was breathtaking. He sent a trusted quiet man named Marcus, whose eyes missed nothing to ride ahead to Redemption Gulch. Marcus's instructions were simple. Melt into the background. Learn. Billy. Parker's every move, identify his guards, and sketch a map of the Thorne Ranch's vulnerabilities. He was an extension of Cole's will, a ghost to watch the ghosts. Meanwhile, telegrams flew. The passenger manifests arrived, and just as Wyatt had said, Luther Thorne's name was there, pristine and accounted for. Cole spread the papers across his desk. It's too clean, he murmured, scanning the columns of names. Amateurs are messy. Professionals are clean. But the arrogant ones, they're too clean. For a full day, they scrutinized the accompanying documents, employee rosters, maintenance schedules, telegraph logs. Wyatt, his mind clouded with images of Imelda, found it hard to focus. His simmering rage was a poor tool for this meticulous work. Cole, however, was a surgeon, methodically dissecting the paper trail. He was the one who found it. Here he set his finger jabbing a line on an employee roster from a small depot called Coyote Creek, 2 stops before Redemption Gulch. Telegraph operator. A man named Frank Henderson resigned his position the day after the murder. The reason cited was a sudden family illness. He was paid his final wages in cash and was gone by sundown. That could be anything, Wyatt said, though his heart began to beat faster. A man with a sick family doesn't run? Cole said, his voice flat. He sends for money. Henderson was paid to disappear. He was paid to hold a message. To report the train from St. Louis on time when it was actually sitting on a siding 20 miles out of town. He was paid to give Luther Thorne a window, a 2, maybe 3-hour window. Long enough to get off at Coyote Creek Ride, hard to the ranch, oversee the murder, and get back on the train before anyone in Redemption Gulch was the wiser. The theory settled into place, solid and terrifyingly plausible. They now had a path. They had to break Billy Parker. With Marcus's maps and intelligence, they rode out from Argento Cole's calm determination, a steadying anchor for Wyatt's frayed nerves. They met the scout in a hidden arroyo, a few miles from the Thorne ranch. The report was concise. Billy was never alone. Caleb or 2 other senior hands loyalists from Thorne's old crew were with him constantly. There's no way to get to him without a full-blown gunfight, Marcus concluded. Cole stared at the map spread on the ground, the firelight flickering across his face. "Then we don't go to him," he said softly. "We make the mountain come to us." The plan was audacious, relying on Wyatt's knowledge of the land and Cole's knowledge of chaos. As night fell, Wyatt crept to the far western boundary of the Thorne property, to an old, dilapidated line shack used for storage. He lit a bundle of oil-soaked rags and tossed it inside. The dry old timber caught with a roar. Within minutes, a column of smoke and an angry orange glow painted the night sky. Just as Cole predicted, the alarm was raised. Caleb, ever the loyal foreman, rallied the majority of the ranch hands and galloped off to fight the blaze, fearing it would spread to the open range. It was the distraction they needed. Billy Parker was left in the bunkhouse with a single, complacent guard. Cole moved through the darkness like a phantom. Wyatt, watching from a ridge, saw only a flicker of movement near the bunkhouse door. There was no loud struggle, just a single, muffled grunt. A moment later, Cole emerged from the shadows, half dragging, half carrying the terrified form of Billy Parker. They took him to the camp in the arroyo. The boy was trembling uncontrollably, convinced his final moments had come. "We're not going to kill you, son," Wyatt said, his voice rough but not unkind. He offered the boy a canteen of water. "We just want the truth. We need it." Billy just wept, shaking his head, too terrified to speak. Caleb's threats were a fresh brand on his soul. Cole stepped into the firelight, his face calm, his presence commanding. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't show a weapon. He simply knelt so he was eye level with the boy. "I know what fear tastes like, Billy." He began his voice a low, mesmerizing cadence. "I know what it's like to be trapped in a plot of your own making, to do things that curdle your soul because you think there's no other choice. But a lie is a prison cell you carry inside you. It gets smaller every day, and right now, the walls of your cell are closing in, and they're about to crush an innocent woman. Is that who you are? A man who lets his fear kill a good woman?" Billy flinched, but he was listening. "Let me tell you a story," Cole continued, his eyes holding the boy's gaze. "Years ago, there was a man. A bad man. He'd done terrible things, and the law was at his heels. He ended up gut-shot and dying in the desert, worth less than the vultures circling over his head. He was ready to die. He deserved it. But then a stranger came along, just a cowboy. He had every reason to finish the job or just ride on by. Instead, he gave the man water. He bandaged his wound. He put the dying outlaw on his own horse and walked for a full day under that killer sun to get him to safety." Cole's voice was barely a whisper now, but it filled the entire arroyo. That stranger gave the outlaw a second chance, a chance to be someone else, a chance to wash the blood off his hands and build a life. Every morning since that outlaw has had to wake up and try to be a man worthy of that gift. Your lie is about to put a rope around the neck of that stranger's wife." Cole paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "You have a choice right now, Billy. You can stay in your cage, or you can take the first step toward being a man worthy of a second chance." "Tell us the truth." The boy's defenses crumbled. A choked sob escaped him, and the entire story came pouring out in a desperate, hiccuping flood. It was Luther. Luther hated his powerful, dismissive father. He was drowning in gambling debts to dangerous men back east. He had come west not to reconcile, but to collect his inheritance. He and Caleb planned the whole thing. Caleb was the one who plunged the knife into Elias Thorne's chest, while Luther watched from the doorway, his face pale and sick. They planted the knife, coached Billy on his story, and threatened to travel to Missouri and murder his mother and sister if he ever breathed a word of the truth. It was the confession they needed, but it wasn't enough. In a courtroom, it was still just a scared boy's word against a wealthy heir and his foreman. The payment, Cole said, his mind already moving to the next step. "Luther is arrogant, but he's not a fool. He wouldn't carry that much cash. He'd have the money wired." To Caleb. They had less than 36 hours. The hanging was set for dawn the day after next. Another telegram was dispatched, this one sent by Marcus on a hard ride to the next town over. It was a coded message to a contact of Cole's in a St. Louis bank, a man who owed him a significant favor. The message requested information on any recent large transfers of funds authorized by Luther Thorne. The following day was an agony of waiting. Wyatt paced the confines of the small camp like a sound wolf, his mind replaying his last conversation with Imelda through the bars of her cell. Cole sat by the fire, sharpening a knife with slow, deliberate strokes, his calmness a stark contrast to Wyatt's turmoil. He was a man waiting for a battle he knew how to fight. That evening, Marcus returned his horse, stumbling with exhaustion. He handed a telegram to Cole. The silence was absolute as Cole read the slip of paper. He looked up, his face grim but triumphant. "It's here. Luther Thorne authorized a wire transfer of $10,000 the day after the murder. It was deposited into a new account at the Bank of San Angelo. An account opened last week by one Mr. Caleb." Cole folded the paper. "We have him." Their only course of action was as clear as it was impossible. They had to ride to San Angelo, force the bank manager to provide a signed statement confirming the deposit, and get back to Redemption Gulch before the sun came up. It was a ride of over 100 miles through treacherous country in the dark. As they prepared their horses, Cole offered Wyatt one of his own pistols. Wyatt looked at it, then shook his head. "I'm not a killer. Neither am I, Wyatt." "Not anymore," Cole said, his voice quiet as he holstered the weapon. "But I will not see your wife die, because we were unprepared. Let's ride." They charged into the night, a storm breaking above them, as if the heavens themselves were raging. Lightning illuminated the landscape in stark, ghostly flashes, followed by claps of thunder that echoed like cannon fire. Rain fell in blinding sheets, turning the ground to slick mud and the dry creek beds into dangerous, surging torrents. It was a hellish, desperate ride, a race against time and the elements. They reached San Angelo just as the first hint of gray lightened the eastern sky. They didn't wait. Cole, his face a mask of cold authority, pounded on the bank manager's home door, dragging the terrified man from his bed. In the bank, with the storm still rattling the windows, Cole laid out the situation with chilling clarity. Faced with Cole's unyielding intensity and the threat of being implicated as an accessory to a capital crime, the flustered manager quickly signed an affidavit confirming Caleb's deposit. They didn't rest. They swapped their exhausted horses for fresh mounts and began the frantic ride back. The sun was now their enemy, a golden eye rising in the sky chasing them. As they crested the last ridge overlooking Redemption Gulch, their hearts seized. The town square was filled with a silent, expectant crowd. The gallows stood stark against the morning sky. And on the platform, a small hooded figure stood between Sheriff Brody and the hangman, Imelda. "Dear God, we're too late." Wyatt choked out the words, ripped from his soul. Cole drew his peacemaker, the click of the hammer cocking, sounding impossibly loud. His face was granite. "No," he gritted out. "We're right on time." He spurred his horse, and together they charged down the hill, their voices roaring a challenge that cut through the morbid silence of the crowd. They thundered into the square like avenging angels, a whirlwind of mud and fury. The crowd scattered. Sheriff Brody spun around, his mouth agape. On the gallows steps, Caleb's face contorted in a snarl of shock and rage as he drew his pistol. A shot rang out, but it wasn't from Caleb. From the edge of the crowd, Luther Thorne, his soft face now a mask of pure panic, fired a pistol wildly in their direction. Before he could fire again, Cole's peacemaker bucked in his hand. The shot was not aimed to kill, but to disable. Luther screamed and collapsed, his gun clattering on the ground as he clutched a shattered shoulder. Seeing his master fall, Caleb fired at Cole. But Wyatt, driven by pure primal instinct, didn't ride for the fight. He spurred Dusty directly at the gallows, launching himself from the saddle in a desperate flying tackle that sent Sheriff Brody tumbling down the steps. Wyatt scrambled onto the platform, his hands shaking as he tore the rough hood from Imelda's head. She gasped, her eyes wide with terror, finally focusing on his face in dawning, disbelieving hope. Below, Cole had dismounted, using his horse for cover with the practiced ease of a veteran gunfighter. He was not the reckless sidewinder. He was a cold tactician. A single deliberate shot from his Colt ripped through Caleb's gun hand, sending his pistol cartwheeling through the air. The burly foreman shrieked in pain and collapsed, cradling his ruined hand. A stunned, absolute silence fell over the square. Wyatt, standing on the platform with his arm around his trembling wife, held the bank manager's affidavit high in the air. His voice, shaking but clear, rang out across the crowd. "Imelda Ford is innocent. Her accusers are the murderers. Luther Thorne paid his foreman Caleb to murder his own father. I have the proof right here." As if on cue, Marcus emerged from the livery stable, pushing a still terrified Billy Parker before him. "Tell them Marcus ordered." And Billy, finding a courage he never knew he possessed, shouted his confession to the shocked faces of his neighbors, the truth finally breaking free. The town, so quick to condemn, stood in collective shame-faced silence. The entire conspiracy, so carefully constructed, had been shattered in less than a minute. Imelda sagged against Wyatt, her sobs of relief the only sound in the square. Cole calmly walked his horse over the smoke from his pistol barrel, curling into the clean morning air. He looked up at Wyatt and Imelda, a faint, unreadable expression on his face. His debt was paid. He had given back the life that was spared for him. The sun rose fully over Redemption Gulch, casting its bright, unforgiving light on the truth. And so the story of Wyatt and Imelda Ford, became a legend in that small Texas town, a testament to love, endurance, and the unshakable power of truth. But it's also the story of a man named Silas Kane, a man called Cole, who proved that redemption isn't just about changing your own life, but about having the courage to repay the debts of your past, an act of mercy, given freely in the dust and heat, returned years later to stop injustice in its tracks. It reminds us that the choices we make, the kindness we offer, when no one is watching, can ripple through time in ways we can never predict. Sometimes even returning to save everything we hold dear. If this tale of the untamed West stirred your soul, don't forget to hit that like button, share it with someone who loves a story of true grit, and subscribe to our channel for more sagas of heroes, outlaws, and the enduring spirit of the American frontier. Let us know in the comments what part of Wyatt and Cole's journey hit you the hardest.